What if everything you thought you knew about Iron Man was wrong? What if the real origin of Iron Man began long before he stepped foot into Afghanistan? Or Vietnam, if you prefer the comics version. What if the beginning of the greatest superhero ever actually began with a whisper in a cave? Welcome back, Nerd Squad. It's me, and today, we're gonna do something different. We're gonna explore some untold secrets of the world's greatest superhero, Iron Man, starting with his untold origin. Let's start at the beginning. Well, actually let's start 5 years before the beginning. In 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, or 13. Depending on which version of the story you read, Tony Stark had already been building things since he was a kid. Now, a lot of emphasis is put on the famous heart-shaped box that young Anthony built for his mother, and the implication being that this is where his genius began. But there's something else lurking in the background of this issue. This experiment might not be as flashy as a homemade robot, but it's just as important to understanding the character. It's his first invention, period, full stop. A simple device he made to help him get out of bed without waking his sleeping mother. Even if it isn't powered armor, it's still an invention, one born out of necessity and love. And what's interesting about it is that we never see it again, not ever. This oversight makes us wonder, why would young Tony need to hide such an important moment in his life? It's like he's ashamed of it. Almost as if he was embarrassed at having to use his genius for such a mundane task. It's hard to imagine that Tony Stark would be ashamed of anything, really. He's always so proud, almost arrogant about his intellect. So why this time? Perhaps it's because his genius is being put to the test for the first time. There's no advanced machinery or college education involved, just a boy and his imagination. This might have been the first instance of Tony realizing he's different, that he has abilities others don't, and Tony doesn't know what to do with that realization. He's hiding things even from himself. It's easy to forget that Tony Stark became Iron Man, despite his genius, and not because of it. Sure, it's what enabled him to make the suit, but his mind wasn't exactly a pristine slate. He was already deep into his career as a weapon manufacturer when he got captured. So we have to ask ourselves, how did he go from making basic inventions as a child to becoming one of the largest weapons dealers in the world? The answer, of course, lies in the comics, specifically Tales of Suspense issues 38 to 40. These stories show a young Tony fresh out of MIT, trying to find his footing in the family business. As happy as he is to leave his college days behind, he's also scared. He's taking over Stark Industries, but he knows he doesn't know anything about manufacturing. Luckily for him, he has Obadiah Stane. Working under his father's shadow must have been daunting, but luckily, Obadiah was always there to lend a helping hand, guiding Tony through the world of industry, teaching him the ins and outs of running an empire. If Tony was struggling to adapt to life as an adult, he wouldn't have been able to do it without Obi's guidance. But who is Obi? If you saw Iron Man in theaters, then you know he ended up becoming Ironmonger, a crazed villain who wanted all of Stark's shares and everything that came with it. But in the comics, Stan's fate is much, much worse. Here, he ends up betraying Tony, manipulating him into leaving Stark Industries only to take control and turn it into a weapons manufacturing plant. You know, the whole Iron Man thing. Anyway, when Tony returns to reclaim his company, Stane tries to destroy him and does succeed in killing Tony's girlfriend. Enraged, Tony fights back, destroying Stane and everything he stands for. This is one of the darkest turns in Iron Man's history, and it is largely overlooked in favor of the MCU's take on the character. But it's a pivotal part of understanding Tony Stark. This is the beginning of his transformation from a spoiled rich kid into a superhero. Because Tony doesn't just fight for the sake of fighting, no. He lashes out against Stane because he wants to save people. He might not know how to be a hero yet, but he knows that what Stane is doing is wrong. He might not have become Iron Man yet, but the beginnings of his morality are very much here. Another piece of the puzzle is something we can all relate to, being inspired by other people. After all, what's your favorite hero, and what inspired you to become one yourself? Well, for Tony Stark, it was another genius engineer, Ho Yinsun. Now, most people remember Yinsun as the man who helped Tony build the first Iron Man suit and sacrificed himself so that Tony could escape the cave. But there's more to their relationship than meets the eye. Yinsun represents something to Tony, a way of life, a code of honor that the young inventor couldn't be further from. When Tony escapes captivity, he leaves Yinsun behind, even though they could have both escaped together. It's a huge decision that haunts Tony for the rest of his life. And it's all because of one sentence. The best way to spread sunshine is to be sunshine. Maybe these words resonate with you, maybe they don't. Either way, it's clear that Yinsun believes in something bigger than himself, a belief that inspires Tony to return home and build the Iron Man suit. That conversation in the cave is the ignition point for the hero's journey. Everything changes from that moment on, and it's all thanks to another hero. But who was this mysterious man? Who was Ho Yinsun? It turns out he was based off to real-life scientists, Jianzhu Sun and Nikola Tesla. But the biggest inspiration came from the paranoia surrounding the Cold War era. Back then, fear of communism was rampant across America. And if you were suspected of having ties to the Soviet Union, then you were in some pretty hot water. Enter Dr. Jianzhu Sun. Born in China, he eventually immigrated to America to study physics. But when the FBI discovered that he'd once been a member of the Communist Party, they stripped him of his citizenship and locked him up for 8 years. Despite his incarceration, he continued to work on rocket propulsion, even earning the nickname Father of Modern Rocketry. After being released in 1966, he returned to Caltech to teach engineering. And according to Bob Layton, one of the writers on Iron Man at the time, this was a huge influence on Ho Yinsun's character. But the biggest question we have to ask is, why does Tony listen to Yinsun in the first place? After all, he could easily kill him and escape without any trouble. Well, that goes back to that scene in the cave. When Tony is first brought in, he finds a picture of Yinsun's family, a wife and daughter. And we later learn that Yinsun was sent to the cave as punishment for refusing to create a weapon. In that moment, Tony sees someone who is being punished for standing up for what he believes in, and it inspires him to do the same. There's a reason we're covering this lesser-known story. To show you that Tony Stark wasn't always Iron Man. He had to grow into the hero we know and love. But what did that look like? What kind of armor did he make? Did he create the classic red and gold suit right away? The answer is a resounding no. In fact, most of those designs didn't even make it to the big screen. One of the most interesting takes comes from Iron Man number 2008, where Tony builds a suit of armor around his car to fight the living laser. The concept is cool, but it's not exactly practical. Still, it's an iconic moment that sets the tone for Tony's future battles. Later, he builds a suit that looks like a cross between a spacesuit and a motorcycle helmet. And yes, it has jet boots, because why not? But the most surprising is a suit that looks a lot like the Hulk's. It's green, bulky and covered in straps, but it's not just a copycat design. It's actually a commentary on the nature of heroism itself. Tony creates this suit to lure out the Mandarin and prove that anyone can be a hero, even someone who doesn't have superpowers. But even though these suits are all cool, none of them compared to the original. Yes, we're talking about the classic red and gold armor we all know and love. But how did Tony make it? Where did he get the materials? And why did he choose those colors? It turns out he found the answers in an unlikely place: the pages of comic books. Specifically, he was inspired by a version of Iron Man from 1963. In this story, Tony decides to take a break from crime fighting and strips down his suit to sell it as scrap metal. However, when he learns that the beer plans to use the metal to make bombs, Tony changes his mind and puts the suit back together. It's a powerful story that shows the inner turmoil Tony struggles with, the constant battle between his genius and his conscience. In that moment, he realizes that being Iron Man isn't just about the suit. It's about who he is inside. This is the birth of the hero we know and love. Speaking of whom, now let's talk about the man behind the mask. What makes Tony Stark tick? What drives him to be the hero he is? And how did that affect him as a person? The answer, my friends, lies within the tangled web of Tony's mind. More specifically, his conflicting thoughts on being a hero. On one hand, he wants to help people. On the other, he struggles with crippling self-doubt. It's a constant battle between his desire to do good and his own personal demons. For Tony, being a hero isn't just about saving the day. It's about confronting his inner darkness as well. And he doesn't always win that battle. In fact, sometimes he loses badly. He becomes a shell of his former self, turning to alcohol as an escape from the pain. Other times, he becomes consumed with his work, throwing himself into creating new and better suits. But no matter how hard he tries, he can't escape the truth. His genius is a blessing and a curse. It allows him to create amazing things, but it also makes him feel isolated and alone. In many ways, Tony Stark is the most human hero in the Marvel Universe. He's not perfect, he makes mistakes, and he suffers the consequences. But that's what makes him so relatable. He's not a god or an alien. He's just a guy who tries his best, even when he fails. Finally, we need to talk about the elephant in the room, the moment that changed everything. We're talking, of course, about Iron Man's first appearance in Tales of Suspense issue 39. Back then, superheroes weren't as popular as they are today. In fact, the genre was considered pretty much dead. So when Stan Lee and Larry Lieber decided to create a new hero, they wanted him to be different. They created a flawed, complex character who wasn't afraid to make mistakes. And they chose to publish him as a war comic of all things. It was a risky move, but it paid off big time. Readers fell in love with Iron Man, and he quickly became one of Marvel's most popular heroes. But it wasn't easy. Stan Lee and his team had to fight tooth and nail to keep Iron Man alive. In fact, he was almost cancelled after just 3 issues. But thankfully, the powers that be gave him a chance, and the rest is history. In conclusion, Tony Stark's origin is a tale as old as time itself, a story of loss, revenge and redemption. But what makes it so compelling is the way it's told. Through Tony's eyes, we see the world in a new way. We understand the complexities of his genius and the demons he battles, and we witness his transformation from a selfish billionaire into a selfless hero. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, stay safe, nerds.